it will be made available to other audiences as we go on. The grant that is sponsoring it is funded through the USDA Farmer Rancher Stress Assistance Network Program and is a partnership of the Pennsylvania Beef Producers Working Group, the Center for Beef Excellence, Center for Poultry and Livestock Excellence, and Center for Dairy Excellence. So I'm Jane Seabright, and I'm representing the Center for Dairy. We have a number of resources to share with you today, and I'm very pleased to have Jackie Zietzelberger and Christy Powell from the Penn State Rural Health Team here to lead the session on navigating mental health in the farm community. A couple of notes before we begin. We will, like I said, we will be recording this webinar and it will be available to you afterwards. We would also like this to be an open forum to ask your questions. You can either use the hand icon to ask your questions verbally, and we'll make sure that we call on you, or you can type your question into the chat box. Before I turn it over to Jackie and Christy, I just wanted to do a brief introduction about each of them. Jackie is a community educator, Penn State Extension Family Wellbeing Team, and a member of the Farm Stress Team. She has a master's in adult and community education and is an undergraduate in psychology. She has worked for several years in the mental health and education system, providing professional development for families and children statewide and nationwide. Jackie is a certified trainer in mental health first aid and the Michigan State Extension Farm Stress curriculum. She is an advocate for individuals struggling with mental health and substance misuse challenges. Christy is from Lehigh County, housed in the Business and Community Vitality Penn State Extension Team. She works with various farms and agribusinesses in the Lehigh Valley and beyond. She was formerly the Agriculture Program Coordinator in Northampton County. And aside from previous ag education and club involvement with Penn State and current professional Penn State Extension work, she also comes from a family-owned livestock and crop farm in Carbon County, which she continues to farm with her family today. So let's welcome. We're going to welcome Jackie and Christy, but before we do that, I would like to go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves and their role in the ag industry. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can give everybody the opportunity to introduce themselves. So let's go around the room. First of all, Amy Theobald, you want to introduce yourself and where you're from? Let's go to Kathy Johnson.
Hi, I'm Kathy Johnson. I'm the Director of Agriculture Business Development for Howard County Economic Development in Howard County, Maryland.
Thanks for joining. Andy Bader.
Hi, I'm Andy Bader. I'm a Pennsylvania Farm Bureau State Board member and very interested in mental health in our rural and agricultural community.
Casey Yost.
Morning, I'm Casey Yost. I'm with the Penn State Extension Dairy Team based in Franklin County.
Ginger.
Good morning. I'm Ginger Fenton, also with the Penn State Extension Dairy Team and with the Farm Stress Team as well.
Amy Leslie.
Hi, I'm Amy Theobald. We got the right Amy?
Go ahead, Amy.
Go ahead, Amy Theobald.
I'm Amy Theobald. I live in Wayne County. You probably haven't heard of us. A lot doesn't get here. I've been in the dairy industry my whole life, and I've experienced that a lot of agricultural stuff does not get here. But I am wanting to share a lot of this information as I've gone through something pretty traumatic in the last few years and on the recovery from that.
And Amy, we will, Jackie and Christy do want to have some conversation later. So please, please, if you're willing to share some of that later, be willing to speak up and share your experiences. I do think that they're very helpful in the conversation. Amy Leslie.
Hi, everyone. Amy Iser Leslie. I'm with American Dairy Association Northeast, which is the local dairy checkoff in the region. And I live in Butler, Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania.
Lee Barge.
Hi, I'm Emily Barge. I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager at the Center for Dairy Excellence.
Missy Anderson.
Hi, I'm Missy Anderson with the Center for Dairy Excellence. I'm the Programs and Operations Manager.
Elizabeth Simple.
Hi, good morning. I'm actually with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets and working on farmer wellness and specifically stress relief for farmers in Vermont.
Thanks for joining. Steve Alessi.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Steve Alessi with Penn State Extension, Client Relation Manager in Northeast Pennsylvania, based in Luzerne County, but cover most of the Poconos and Wyoming Valley for Extension. So good morning.
Thanks for joining. Kathy Johnson, are you able to introduce yourself? Oh, I think you already did. Jerry Musser. Okay. Allison, are you able to speak?
Good morning. I'm Allison Kraskowski. I'm a farm loan officer with the USDA Farm Service Agency, and I'm located in Crawford County.
Thanks for joining. And Kelly D.
Good morning. I'm Kelly Driver. I am the Eastern Region rep for Captel, and just curious about some stress management stuff. Sometimes on farms, you encounter folks that are under a lot of stress, and just looking for some tips, I guess.
And yeah, and again, like I had said, I think Jackie and Christy really want this to be interactive. Ask your questions, raise your hands, type them in the chat box. Hopefully we can talk about some of that stuff. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy and Jackie. Welcome, and I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thank you, Jane. Okay, so we're gonna get started here. Some necessary slides from Penn State Extension that we just have to share before we get going. This presentation is available in alternative media upon request. Extension is committed to making our information as accessible as possible, and therefore this presentation is available in alternative media upon request. And we have many resources to share with you today, and if you have any assistance with the material, if you need any assistance with the materials, please just let us know. Next slide. So Penn State Extension, I know there's a couple of other extension folks on here, but just to give a brief recap, we are a modern educational organization dedicated to delivering science-based information to people, communities, and businesses across the Commonwealth. We have offices in all 67 counties that are open. You can come and visit with us. You can email us, you can call us. And you can also check us out on extension.psu.edu for all of our materials, programs, upcoming events, things like that. So we are glad to be here with you today. So we are talking today about communicating with farmers under stress. And this virtual workshop, we are thankful for the opportunity to have it virtually. I know there's been opportunities that it's been in person across the state, but we thank you for your interest in this very important topic. We're offering this workshop at the request of a large group of collaborators who care about the ag community in Pennsylvania. So I want to thank the group for promoting us and prompting us to do this. This workshop is intended for professionals who serve the ag industry, and we realize that you're on the front lines working with farmers day in, day out. And we intend for this workshop to be about 2 hours long. So there might be some sections that we kind of go through rather quickly and some other sections that we take more time to do so. In today's workshop, workshop, we are going to explore the subject of farm stress, a subject that's affecting the lives of many farmers and their families. The material in this program was authored and developed by a multidisciplinary team at Michigan State University Extension, and experts in this realm included social emotional health educators, former farmers, ag educators, and other experts in the field. A list of the authors and all the contributors of the materials are mentioned at the end of this presentation. And like we said before, we intend for this to be interactive. Feel free to jump in, raise your hand, use the reaction buttons, use the chat as we go on, just to look for your input throughout this presentation. And we are grateful to have this material and to be able to have adapted it. And we are hoping that you can learn some things today to help you work with farmers who may be stressed, as well as learn about things for yourself in terms of managing stress. Next slide. So here's a list of all of us on the Penn State Extension Farm Stress team who have been involved with this presentation or similar presentations and programs in recent times. And you can contact any of us for questions or for, looking for additional resources along the way that have to do with farm stress. So you can take that slide off here later on. And Jackie, if you want to pick up from here on some of the things we chatted about earlier.
Hi, my name is Jackie Zietzelberger, like Jane said, and I come from a different arena, and I work with the food, family health, and family well-being. So our Penn State Extension director and associate director has really supported our efforts to promote well-being, mental and physical well-being. So that's the angle that I'm coming at with this presentation. So I'm excited to hear from you today and how I can help. My background, I have pretty extensive background in mental health and have been working with Extension for quite a long time too. So yeah, I'm interested in your stories and how I can help in bringing this information. It's important that we think about reducing the stigma of mental health. We need to bring an awareness to this, and this is why we need all of your help. So I appreciate again you allowing us to offer this webinar, and it was quite a jaunt for us to travel up there, and I'm excited to see that so many of you have joined via this webinar. We do have handouts, so I believe those were emailed to you. If you're having difficulty with, you have one screen and you're having difficulty viewing those, we can put those in the chat. If you want me to, I can actually share my screen when we're talking about those. So any way to make this work for you today. A lot of you are looking at a single screen. So that can be difficult when you're kind of juggling back and forth, but you do have handouts. Those are available to you. We're not going to probably be able to cover most of those handouts, but I'm going to reference those, and they are available to you. We do have other resources too. So
and Jackie, that Emily did put that into the chat as well as
awesome.
Was emailed out.
Yeah, is that the link to the handouts?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Oh, and let's go back just a second here. I would like to know in the introductions here, if you're comfortable using the chat, if you would click on your little chat icon, and if you'd put in the chat what you wanted to get out of this. I know some of you said that you're looking for some stress management techniques, but please share. It helps me know what you're interested in. So if you could put in the chat why you're joining us today. To support someone who seems to be struggling. Okay, and thank you for wanting to know that information, Amy. We all need to play our part. Now, while I'm waiting for folks to put some things in the chat, our team, our family well-being team, offers mental health first aid, and I encourage you, if you have an opportunity, to take that. It's a lengthy training, but we go into a lot of information lot of information that helps you with talking to someone who's struggling. And we go in a lot more detail.
We have some others in the chat here as well, Jackie.
Okay.
Wanting to learn more about mental health
Support.
issues facing the farm community, personal learning.
Okay. Yeah, we do have some information that we're going to share with you right now. Some up-to-date information on what's going on with the farming personal learning. Okay. And please continue to put that in the chat. That would be helpful. So we'll move on. Chronic stress, epilepsy. Yeah. We're all affected by this, so we can all do our part.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for continuing to share too.
Okay, so some objectives for today. So this topic of farm stress was not part of the training for many of us who work in the ag industry, but it's an increasing part of the conversations that we're having. So in the workshop this morning, we will work to build awareness around potentially stressful conditions affecting some farmers. We'll learn about triggers, identify signs of stress, and cover some of the helpful techniques for responding in times of stress. And we'll also learn about some of the techniques for identifying and approaching knowing how you can assist with farmers who may not be coping with stress in the best ways. And finally, we will provide a lot of resources in various forms, throughout the handouts, throughout resources that are going to be shared during the presentation, and throughout resources that are going to be shared at the end of the presentation, like helplines and things like that, things that you can use and that can also be passed on to others. We just want to note that this can be a difficult topic for many. It may evoke emotions. And, please know that you do not have to share if you do not feel comfortable doing so, but you are welcome to share throughout the presentation if you would like to. We understand if you need to step away or kind of pause from, what we're talking about here. And that we just want to note that all of us here at Penn State Extension who are involved with the farm stress team and who are talking today, we are not clinicians, and we are not a replacement for professional advice. But we hope to provide you some resources to help you and others along the way. Next slide. Okay, so an informal survey here, and I'm just going to go through these questions, and if anyone wants to put into the chat, or you can use the reactions button, like a thumbs up or whatever, or if you want to raise your hand, we just want to know throughout the room here, just kind of putting into perspective. So who among you are, in addition to the role that you currently have, are lifelong multi-generational farmers? All right. I don't know if there's anybody else raising their hands here. A couple folks. Okay. What about, are you in the business because you love it? Right. That should be most of us here, right? How many of you know of at least one farmer who is currently under great stress because of the economic uncertainties of the business or because of a medical related matter? It's probably some of us, right? How many of you believe that this farmer has adequate support from the existing social and economic safety nets? Okay. And how many of you are prepared to identify and deal with a stress-related emergency affecting another farmer? Okay, so there's a couple folks here, and it's good to know, who's in the room and how we can potentially help you with that and help you work through it. So, we're going to go through some slides here of what we know about farm stress, and I'm going to try to go through these a little bit quicker so that we can get to some of the actual techniques and how we can help deal with stress. So what we know is obviously farming is a stressful, high-risk profession. Most of us are aware that farming can be stressful and that at least some of the farmers that we know are confronted with challenges more than others. Farming can be really hard on the body, and we've seen this through data. The first bullet point here says that in 2016, there were 417 farmers and farm workers who died from a work-related injury. Most of these fatalities are from transportation incidents like tractor overturns, which in turn turns to a really high cost associated with that, and that's for the family and the people that have been working with those incidents. Also, what we know is that people that work in food production and processing have a significantly higher mortality rate among those in non-food industries. And every day there are approximately 100 agricultural workers who suffer an injury leading to lost work time. And there's a lot of incurred costs that come along with that, and medical costs, lost productivity, things like that. And also there's statistics that have shown that out of these occupations and laborers, that farm owners and laborers have the highest rate of deaths due to stress-related conditions such as heart and artery disease, hypertension, ulcers, and nervous disorders. So like I said before, farming is very hard on the body, and it's also very hard on the mind too, to the point of, the second point here of opioids are an issue in rural communities. 3 out of 4 farmers say it would be easy to access opioids. So, farmers may be dealing with their stress irresponsibly. And then also the other point that we know is that there is inadequate medical presence in most rural communities. It's either that the infrastructure is not there or it is certainly not being utilized. We must all learn to manage our stress levels and reduce the effects of unwanted stress. Too much stress can make a person more accident prone and affect our health and well-being. And this is why it's important to identify common stressors, recognize the symptoms of stress, and manage stress by doing these 3 things. We will work to make the workplace a safer place. So next slide here. Okay, so what we also know about farm stress is that there's this coined phrase called the Agrarian Imperative, and that there is a connection that farmers have to their land, animals, crops, equipment, all other assets, and that it's a very powerful connection that farmers have, and that they will hang on to these things at all costs. Dr. Michael Rossman has coined this phrase, and he has added on here throughout recent work and saying that farmers are genetically programmed to provide for their families and the communities by maintaining these, the land, animals, equipment, all other assets that they have. They'll grow to great measures to accomplish these things, go through high risk, go through, enduring very hard tasks and, just going above and beyond, which, can certainly be unhealthy for themselves and the others around them. And that they feel that if they go to great measures to accomplish this and they fail, that losing the farm is perceived as failure and can increase the risk of suicide and other factors that go along with it. So, it's farmers work hard, we all work hard. We have that mentality of, just kind of just toughing it out. And, that's not always the best way to go about things. But, with that, we recognize that this agrarian imperative can relate to many values that farmers may have. So I'm just kind of wondering here if some people can put into the chat, or what do you think are some of the values that farmers have that can be a flip side of, this hard work and, just being passionate about what they do? Determination. Do we have any other examples? Integrity. Independence. Yes, very good examples. Confidence. Right. So, on the flip side of this, from what we know about farmers is that, they're very hardworking, determined, they take care of family and their friends and the land and the animals that they have and everything that goes along with it. And that these values makes situations in farming very unique compared to other occupations or lifestyles. And we had another one here, raising my family here, they're productive adults, exactly. So there's very much a flip side to it. And then also, that we know that, it can in turn, become very stressful to farmers. So next slide. Okay. So I'm going to show a couple slides here on some graphs putting into the realities of farming and perspective of stress. These should not be a surprise to you. And just going through really quickly here, as we see on this graph for net farm income, there have been recent boom years from 2011 to 2013, and then things started to slide. This has led to a situation where net farm income has declined about 50% following that peak. And keep in mind that since this program was developed, it was during a period of really depressed prices in areas and things like that. And prior to COVID, farm income experienced an upswing. And then the data on this graph includes forecasts for 2021 and 2022. The graph may look different when the actual data was released, as we experienced, unprecedented times in the past year, and that government payments due to COVID and decreased farm receipts will have a substantial influence on the final numbers that we will see in 2021 and 2022, which is something to be aware of on balance sheets. So, commodity prices are increasing. There's a current uptick, but there's uncertainty for 2022. Production expenses are increasing, and dairy has been hit hard, but it's starting to rebound. So next slide. Okay, so this one shows the net farm income that varies tremendously by state. Pennsylvania is shown on the graph here at number 20. We were number 14 in 2019, so we kind of fell a little bit here, but it just shows that agriculture plays a major role in Pennsylvania. To put into context here, the one all the way to the left, that's California as number 1. That shouldn't be a surprise as well, but agriculture does play a very major role in Pennsylvania's economy. And those are our top 5 cash receipts there. Dairy is number 1. And then going down through miscellaneous crops, cattle and calves, corn and mushrooms. Next slide. Okay, so from this graph, we can see that net farm income has seen some major fluctuations in recent years. Instability and uncertainty certainly adds to stress levels for the farmers and people that work with farmers. Again, this graph depicts data through 2020, where net farm income was on the upswing with pre-COVID and other factors. And the table on the right shows the top 5 production expenses that go along with it. And that with that, input costs can really fluctuate. These really aren't a surprise. We know that there's really high input costs, especially for this year, and it's probably going to, trend through, upcoming years. But going down through here, one important part to make is, the hired labor part. Labor is expensive and also very hard to find and maintain, especially with what we've seen throughout the pandemic. And this is likely to continue as well with the other production expenses that are going to be incurred. Next slide. Okay, so, dairy farms, fluctuating milk prices. In 2014, there was a profound sustained decline in the price that was paid to dairy farmers in milk, and the cost that incurred to produce milk has been higher than the payment that they receive for milk. As you can see, fluctuations here throughout the chart are very noticeable, but they have been recently on the rise and have risen more even since this chart was last updated. COVID greatly impacted these dairy markets, and again, feed, fertilizer, other input costs have increased while milk prices and whatnot have varied. Some farmers use tools available to them to manage risks and fluctuations, and others do not. Next slide. So what we're seeing here is that, the dairy farms aren't the only farm sector experiencing fluctuations in markets. Cash grains are following the same trends. Currently, prices have gone up for these commodities, but again, higher input costs are cutting into profit margins. And the management decisions related to these rising costs, like fertilizer and equipment, have added substantial stress to farmers. As with dairy, like again, it's just figuring out the management decisions for these input costs, especially throughout this year, is going to be key to figuring out managing stress for farmers. Next slide. And then this slide shows here the median farm income by ag sector, showing us in gray the median total household income by commodity specialization compared to the median household income from farming, that's in yellow. We can see that for some commodities, income from farming makes up a substantial portion of overall household income, such as rice, tobacco, cotton, peanuts, and dairy. And then for some others, household income from farming is much lower, as you can see on the chart here, in terms of a farmer's household income. Dairies were the only segment in U.S. agriculture showing a median total household income that was nearly half of the total of income. And the reason for this is based on the high operator labor intensity of dairy farming relative to other commodities. Next slide. So weather-related losses. Weather is always a huge factor that is brought up to farmers as a significant portion of stress. In 2017, there was an estimated total of more than $300 billion in economic losses that were incurred from 16 different weather-related disasters that totaled $1 billion in damage. That's a lot. The past few years have seen some of the worst natural disasters on record, including drought and fires that seem to hit farm country worse than other areas of the country. And fires and droughts and floods and things like that that destroy farmland and farm animals often translate into far more than just an immediate one-time economic loss to the farmer. It can also wipe out animals and herds, things that took years and generations to develop. It's definitely certainly these factors, they're always a source of frustration and stress to all types of farmers because they're unpredictable and crucial without some sort of risk management or contingency plan to go along with it. Next slide. So what we know here is that, the obvious is that price fluctuations in ag markets are always going to exist, but will be especially rough in the immediate future with the high input costs and expenses and the overall global climate and conditions. Farmers are in planting season right now. They've already been experiencing these stressors, and things are going to continue throughout the season, till we get to harvest season and can hopefully get some money back and, hopefully, can make up some ends from there. Many farmers are going to struggle with positive cash flow to this end, and that financial stress will lead to prolonged mental and physical stress for many farmers. There are many tools available through Penn State Extension and other partner agencies that we have and other organizations to assist with farmers with risk management and financial planning is what we want to stress here throughout the obvious. So Jackie, I'll hand it over to you next.
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, that was stressful just listening to that. So I can't imagine being knee deep in that. So now we're going to be talking about identifying, managing stress in ourselves and helping others. So in this section, we'll talk quite a bit about stress, and we'll talk about how we can help ourselves and identify those things in family, friends, and people that we work with. I think that's maybe the reason why a lot of you have joined. So with challenging economic times and coupled with other mitigating factors, such as like what Christy had talked about, which the injury rates, and then there's that low access to healthcare, and that is very true, not just for physical health, but mental health, and we'll talk about there. And the Agrarian Imperative, which really drives a lot of this, the reasons why we're here today. So again, that can drive all the stress levels up on farm and food production chain. So in this section, we'll talk about identifying those stressors with ourselves. So let's take a look at this slide just for a moment, and we'll talk about stress within ourselves. So we need to know about that stress response. and this, we'll talk about that readily identifiable signs of stress or anxiety that's I refer to. So techniques for managing that, getting some help, because we can't always do this by ourselves. We need a strong support system. And then identifying stress in someone else. And that's tricky. You may be around that person quite often and you may not. It may be just a visit or an appointment that you have. So you know, that can be difficult. Approaching farmers, what do you do? What do you say? Active listening, practicing active listening can be one of the single most important things that you do. And developing a game plan and then getting more help. We need to, what we say in mental health first aid, tag out. We need to understand that we have limitations to what we do. And that's what I think is sometimes the barrier or why people don't want to help. It's because they're really not sure how they help, how they can help, but they also need to be aware of those resources that are in the community that you can refer to. And that's one thing that you can do as an individual, is that you can find those resources in the community and you can make suggestions and tag out, find those professionals and self-help and strategies that people can do. So what is stress? This is defined here: a need or a demand people confront that is perceived as burdensome or threatening and can lead to physical or mental health problems. I want you to focus on that word perceived, because that's very important. What one person or one farmer sees as a challenge, another one may perceive as burdensome. So some amounts of stress can help motivate us to meet a challenge, and that's okay, because we need a little bit of stress in our lives every day. That's what gets us motivated. So stressors we're going to talk about generally fall into two groups, which is acute, this disruptive life events that I think some of you have mentioned, and that chronic, that ongoing challenge that we have with stress. So a person's reaction to stress or coping with stress is often based on a balance between different types of resources that you have. So that includes those material resources, those psychological resources like a sense of mastery and self-esteem, and then social resources, that social support, which is huge. You need to have people besides your family supporting you. So think of a superhero or kind of an action movie, and the resources that superhero have, you can think of like his shield that he has and he holds, and that helps him defend against the enemies. Well, we want to think of that as, those support systems that we have. So the fewer resources one has, that weaker that shield is. And I remember working with a psychiatrist once, and he said, well, how he views it is that when he looks at a patient, he wants to see an army of support behind each one. And that's how someone is going to be successful. I just want to cover just real quick here. With stress is external. So that's, like trying to get this webinar done. This is like, I feel this stress of time. Okay, so I have this external stress, and so then stress can trigger that anxiety. And that's what we're really concerned about, is anxiety is our response to stress. And that's internal. And, again, that feeling of dread that I won't finish in time can be some of the feelings that you have. So anxiety is that feeling of worry that's caused by that. Remember, I said perceived threats in your environment. So unlike stress, the stressors go away, they come and go, just like everyone talks about this weather, but anxiety persists. So that stays. So when you keep turning that over in your head, that's when people get concerned. So yeah, we have that productive anxiety or stress that we talked about, and that's that normal reaction to stress. And we need that to get that going. But
Jackie.
Yeah.
Jackie, we actually have a really good question. So you're talking about stress. Why is it so much easier to fall back into isolation when you're stressed, even when you know your network of loved ones is there and present to help you? So why do people resort to isolation instead of getting the help that they need?
And And I'd like you to hold that thought just for a minute, but yes, that's one of the things those signs that we need to look for, because what happens sometimes is we get overwhelmed. Or we feel that mentally when we have that thinking, we're thinking, okay, I have to do this myself. And what happens when you're feeling bad, then you tend to pull away from people. You kind of go within yourself, and that's dangerous. That's why I work so hard with the Farm Stress team, trying to figure out how we can get to farmers and talk to them, because the only way that we can deal with that is that if we can open up and not isolate and talk to people, because that's how we can work things out. We can get our heads wrapped around it. But if that becomes a habit, that's when things can get scary. So we need to be careful about that. That's one of those signs I'm going to talk about in just a moment. That's why I want you to kind of hold that thought, because I'm going to be mentioning that in just a little bit. So I'm going to ask you right now. So again, I'm going to go over that a little bit more. So I'm preaching. I don't want to preach to the choir, because I know all of these things you recognize as those examples of stressors in farming. So give me your opinion then. And I'm just kind of curious, again, this is perceived. So what do you perceive as chronic or acute stressors here? And no, you can't put all.
So you can type
put that in the chat
or say it out loud if you would like.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
Disagreements with
It's
family
like family
members.
members. Okay. Okay. And you can put multiple ones, you just can't put all. So what really do you perceive as that chronic or acute stressor? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out from all of you. And as an example, that, what some person may feel as far as, commodity prices or even livestock illnesses. Okay, they may say, okay, this is something that I can deal with. But when we talk about weather, again, one person may perceive weather as, that there's nothing that you can do about that. And there's others that are, really, really concerned and perseverate over that weather condition. So generational transitions, debt, taking the next step. Okay, cash flow.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And please put more in. Go ahead and just keep putting more in the chat as I move along here. We're going to watch a video next. And so we want you to be aware of stressors and how that affects your body, because this is where things can get very dangerous.
Cramming for a test? Trying to get more done than you have time to do? Stress is a feeling we all experience when we are challenged or overwhelmed. But more than just an emotion, stress is a hardwired physical response that travels throughout your entire body. In the short term, stress can be advantageous, but when activated too often or too long, your primitive fight or flight stress response not only changes your brain, but also damages many of the other organs and cells throughout your body. Your adrenal gland releases the stress hormones cortisol, epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and norepinephrine. As these hormones travel through your bloodstream, they easily reach your blood vessels and heart. Adrenaline causes your heart to beat faster and raises your blood pressure, over time causing hypertension. Cortisol can also cause the endothelium, or inner lining of blood vessels, to not function normally. Scientists now know that this is an early step in triggering the process of atherosclerosis, or cholesterol plaque buildup in your arteries. Together, these changes increase your chances of a heart attack or stroke. When your brain senses stress, it activates your autonomic nervous system. Through this network of nerve connections, your big brain communicates stress to your enteric or intestinal nervous system. Besides causing butterflies in your stomach, this brain-gut connection can disturb the natural rhythmic contractions that move food through your gut, leading to irritable bowel syndrome, and can increase your gut's sensitivity to acid, making you more likely to feel heartburn. Via the gut's nervous system, stress can also change the composition and function of your gut bacteria, which may affect your digestive and overall health. Speaking of digestion, does chronic stress affect your waistline? Well, yes. Cortisol can increase your appetite. It tells your body to replenish your energy stores with energy-dense foods and carbs, causing you to crave comfort foods. High levels of cortisol can also cause you to put on those extra calories as visceral or deep belly fat. This type of fat doesn't just make it harder to button your pants. It is an organ that actively releases hormones and immune system chemicals called cytokines that can increase your risk of developing chronic diseases such as heart disease and insulin resistance. Meanwhile, stress hormones affect immune cells in a variety of ways. Initially, they help prepare to fight invaders and heal after injury, but chronic stress can dampen the function of some immune cells, make you more susceptible to infections, and slow the rate you heal. Want to live a long life? You may have to curb your chronic stress. That's because it has even been associated with shortened telomeres, the shoelace tip ends of chromosomes that measure a cell's age. Telomeres cap chromosomes to allow DNA to get copied every time a cell divides without damaging the cell's genetic code. And they shorten with each cell division. When telomeres become too short, a cell can no longer divide, and it dies. As if all that weren't enough, chronic stress has even more ways it can sabotage your health, including acne, hair loss, sexual dysfunction, headaches, muscle tension, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, and irritability. So, what does all this mean for you? Your life will always be filled with stressful situations, but what matters to your brain and entire body is how you respond to that stress. If you can view those situations as challenges you can control and master, rather than as threats that are insurmountable, you will perform better in the short run and stay healthy in the long run.
Okay, does anyone have any comments or questions? You can go ahead and put that in the chat.
There was one comment here: in countries with high instability, inflation, government and isolation of society is difficult. Planification, this generates for anxiety and stress. That was a good comment there. Any other comments that we had to go along with that? I thought that was a great video to show stress and how it affects our bodies. Certainly.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that too. So, because I think if you understand what your body is doing, maybe that's a little bit more of a motivator to think about what you can do in order to manage your stress. So, like
it's actually a really good question.
Stress is chronic. Good. Yeah, that's a good point. And we're going to talk about that because we need to look at the symptoms. And when we look at those symptoms, and I don't want to get ahead because then, but then we need to look at how long that's happening. And so that's when we know that things are starting to get chronic, because we experience those things every day. And then our body starts to tell us this. So when we're talking about the video, they were talking about cortisol. And so this is really important for you to know. So cortisol is known as your stress hormone, and that is released in times of fear or stress. So you've heard the fight or flight. And then when you get that cortisol, and what happens is that it increases your glucose, which are the sugars in your bloodstream. And that can help us when we need to, in a stressful period that can help our bodies kick into gear and react to the stress. However, when the cortisol level remains elevated, possibly due to that chronic stress, this is when we can have some detrimental impacts on, and I apologize, I did not click on my screen. So it can have some detrimental effects on our health. And this is what we need to be really concerned about. So cortisol can alter things in our bodies. So it can affect our immune system. It suppresses your digestive. It can really wreak havoc on your digestive and reproductive systems. And it suppresses those the growth processes. Cortisol changes our mood, our fears, our motivation, and then the health problems that are associated with it. That's sounds like doom and gloom, but just to be aware that it affects, it can create heart disease, lower your immune system response. It can cause digestive problems like IBS. You can have sleep problems where you're not sleeping well, you're not falling asleep, or you're waking up. Issues with your memory and your concentration. You can have weight gain, anxiety, depression, and it can even lower your life expectancy. So it's something to be aware of, and not to frighten you, but it's just to be aware of that it affects your whole body when you have this reaction to those stressors. And so I have my little bottle here. I'm hoping that you can see that with my background behind me, but you can look at this and you can see my hand, you can see the water is clear. And then what happens, of course, when you have that cortisol and it starts to get shaken up in your system, this is what happens with our thinking. So we're not thinking clearly. And that can be dangerous because you need to be thinking clearly when you're on the farm, when you're on a tractor, when you're with the animals, you need to be thinking clearly. So when you do get stressed, angry, or scared, your blood is flooded with this cortisol. So we're going to do a quick activity. Now, we don't have paper plates. If we were doing this in person, we would do this on your paper plate. So grab a piece of paper that's near you so you don't have to get up. Grab a pen. And I'm going to stop talking here. I want you to write down on your piece of paper here those things that you find as that stresses you out. Those things that you find stressful. And what we can do to kind of share those things out too is if you feel comfortable, again, this is challenge by choice. So I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable putting things in the chat, but I welcome your input. If you could put in the chat maybe some of those things that, stress you out.
And we have a couple here: work, childcare balance, finances, not enough me time, climate change, relation with some people, with some stressors.
So so relationships with some people.
Yep.
Okay. And if anyone wants to unmute and share some of those things that are really stressful for you, you can do that.
I'll unmute. For me, there is a huge workload, and then because there's not enough of us willing to volunteer for committees in the agriculture industry, sometimes we take on way too much. I know I'm very guilty of that. And then trying to do family as well. So, and in my case, I was a single mom of 4 sons that I had complete custody of. So it made it even more interesting. Now they're grown up and working in the ag industry as well. So
I agree with Kathy. I think definitely in the ag community, a lot of us have our full-time jobs, and then we also have our farm jobs, and then we also have our family and our kids. So I think that's overwhelming for a lot of people. Definitely overwhelming for me at times.
Yeah, we don't know how to say no, right?
Definitely.
We try, but
Mhm. It's that mentality to tough it out, right?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be able to get it done.
Mhm.
And if you're not going to volunteer, who will, and who's going to help
Yeah.
with this? So yeah.
We had
And
some
I know many are very familiar with that.
Amy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think I might be in a little different age group. I'm not sure, but like when my kids were in 4-H and we were running them all over to shows and whatever, I thought I conquered the world with all that and I could do so much. And now that I'm a little over 50-ish, I feel like we're working harder now than we ever were. And there's less us time. And I think we don't tell our adult children what to do, but watching some of their decisions is very hard. And my stressors are different, I think, because I'm on the up end of a breakdown. So I'm still in the phase of like just the phone ringing, kind of, it's like stepping on a nail. And the demand from the guys. And my guys are good, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I don't want to be the secretary and the parts runner and all that stuff in between and the reminder. And I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but that's the stage I'm in, where I am still the micromanager and I really don't want to be.
I think any farm wife, any person working, like any on the farm, that everything that doesn't get done by somebody else kind of falls on you. At least I think that's the way it is for a lot of women in farming, that they count on you to take care of the details, and it's awful challenging at times.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that.
There's also some other here: stress of borrowers, stress at work, kids activities, illness, bills, business, multitasking. And then Kelly, shares the same sentiment as Amy, is being tired of being the glue.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, how many of those things, when you're thinking about it, those things that you wrote down and those things that you mentioned, how many of those things are in your control? I don't know. I'm just asking, how many of those things are that you're stressed about are in your control?
Mrs.
I
Berger.
think we'd like to think that we can do most of them, but I think when events and things come up and you're doing so many things and you realize exactly how much your plate is overwhelmed, that's when you realize that you're doing too much.
So it's a balance. That's an issue of balance then?
Yes.
Okay.
And getting other people to understand that you need to have that balance in your life.
Okay.
I think because I've deliberated some of this stuff to my husband, and they're just small things. Like, here's the cell phone, which he refuses to have one, but that's his choice. You can call the parts guy, or you can do this. And because I have deliberated some of that stuff his direction,
yeah,
I can see the stress load has really affected him since our situation. Like, because I've deliberated some of that stuff to him, because the men are different, just like why don't we have men on this conference call today? I mean,
we have two guys. Maybe we can get the two guys to speak up here too.
But it's, and anybody goes to their county, like ag day or whatever, you can see it. Like, you can see hygiene issues, you can see, and this is all depression related. I've only learned this like in the last few years, but it's so prevalent. And only because I'm in it, I'm learning it, but I'm not ready to preach it or fix it by any means.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a minute, about those things that, those signs that we see. But I guess I'm wondering, those are things that we need to think about when we talk about those stressors, is what do we have control of? Because if it's an issue of addressing something we don't have control of, then that's when we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that we don't have control of, and maybe it's an issue of wanting to control things too, but and having that acceptance that sometimes things are the way they are. We'll go back to the weather again. We don't have control over the weather. So it's a really hard concept to get your head wrapped around, but if you can accept things that you cannot control, or they're out of your control, and feel okay with that's something, that I realize that it's not in my control, but what is in my control? And then acknowledging what is in your control, and then focusing your energies on problem solving. And that's probably one of the most difficult things, is to refocus from those things that we can't control to the things we can. Okay, I can control, I can't control the weather, but I can control when I actually put my crops in. So that's what you need to be thinking of. And sometimes we also need to be thinking out of the box too. And that's why we have these webinars, is to talk to each other. And that's why you have meetings with groups, because you can share ideas. There's sometimes we have to think out of the box, and we have to be around people who think that way. And that can be helpful.
Sorry, just to chime in a little bit on I think it's a personal example, but what stress definitely during the pandemic, and when I saw some others put in childcare and work-life balance and what that looked like, and what was in my control and what wasn't. Daycare would shut down for a week, and then my childcare was gone, and then that was out of my control. But my stress then became, okay, how do we balance then? How do we take care of our kids and get our jobs done? Especially once we kind of got back into normal travel, we both travel, that kind of stuff. So then it was, and mind you, then what I really should have been concerned about was my kids, and if they were healthy, and if they, if the childcare was shut down because there was a COVID case, my main focus should have been on my kids' health, not necessarily my work balance or how we're going to get things done. But so I really appreciate your comments of like trying to take that step back of what is in my control and what can I do to make that happen. But it's hard when you're in that moment of, you get the call from daycare, you have to come pick them up, and that 20 minutes before you're like, well, what am I going to, how am I going to do this? I mean, that was kind of, again, very personal to what we've been.
No, thank you for sharing.
In the last
thank you
couple
for
years,
sharing.
but,
I think it tests our problem solving skills. And we can't do everything. Sometimes, like I have to rely on my farm stress team, or my other teams. I can't come up with those solutions. And so that's where we get into the support group. So we're going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit more about what stress looks like. But we really do want to emphasize that, yes, everyone goes through this, and yes, we have to problem solve, but we also need to be thinking about how we can help ourselves. Awesome that you're thinking about your children, but you are just as important too. And we always use the analogy of when you're on the airplane, you put the mask on first before you put on someone else, because you need to be healthy. You need to be healthy physically and emotionally.
Jackie, Dario actually has just like being a personality type A can be real. So we wanted input from
definitely your temperament and personality play into a big part of that, and how you deal. But that, we just think of it though as that's a component of it. That's all part of who you are. And then we'll go from there. So let's talk a little bit more about stress. So
can I also add one thing?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I just think culturally, Like it's, somebody saying like type A if you're personally type A, but I think culturally we don't, being, like saying into most workplaces, like, hey, I kind of need to check out this week because my daycare shut down. And, that's just the reality. Like that doesn't really fly with in many sort of environments. So there's not really a culture of letting people like express their stressors and trying to fill the gaps. Like that's a very individualistic culture for many. That's my, for many, like workplace, even, beyond the workplace environments.
Oh, absolutely. Culture plays a big part of it too. It definitely is. So thank you for sharing. We're going to move on and we're going to pull all of this together as we keep moving forward. So we did talk about how do you know when you're feeling stressed? And quite a few of you have mentioned some things, those stressors. And I just wanted to point out that when we're looking at signs and symptoms, and I may have mentioned this before to you, is that those signs are those visible things. And those symptoms are those things that are invisible that we can't really see in another person. And so that's why it's so important that we talk about it. We have to talk about this because that's the only way we know what's going on with those symptoms that we're experiencing. So those signs, we break them up into, the signs and symptoms. We break it up to physical, emotional, behavioral, cognitive, self-worth. This is all about our thinking and how it affects us. And it's pretty amazing when you think about it. If you realize how significant your thinking is, that it can be pretty profound in how you can change your thinking and how it can then change this physical, emotional, behavioral, and so on. So I'm going to go into a little bit. I wanted to cover this because I know some of you have been talking about it, but I wanted to list those things. This is not a comprehensive list, but I did want to cover these, take the time to cover these. So physically, we're looking at headaches, ulcers, backaches. Yes, absolutely. Eating problems. So eating, being a tendency to, like they said in the video, we tend to have a tendency to want to be eating more carbs, those comfort foods. We have those sleeping problems, frequent sicknesses. And this is just things that can be not COVID, but just those things of, frequent head colds and upper respiratory. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And exhaustion, just feeling tired all the time. And it not necessarily mean that you're working an 8 or a 10-hour day, but that you're emotionally just exhausted and it affects your body. So emotionally, we're talking about that sadness, depression, that bitterness, anger, anxiety, loss of spirit, loss of sense of humor, loss of motivation. And then we have irritability. You may have that backbiting, acting out, being passive aggressive toward our families and friends, anger, increased drinking, and taking drugs, and not necessarily taking drugs with the intent of being in like an overdose, but even just misusing, because farming takes a toll on the body. And so opioids could have been prescribed at one point to manage that. And then now it's an issue of misuse. And then there's isolation, violence. And then there's memory loss, lack of concentration, difficulty with simple decisions, lack of focus. So then you feel like a failure. Can't do anything right, not being able to fix things. So this can be a real combination of things. Is there anything in the chat that I missed while I was?
Yeah, I think that the difficulty with simple decisions is one that I've noticed with folks, is what Amy said, especially people that are normally very decisive.
And that's where that cortisol, that's we get the, things get really shook up. And this is why we have difficulty with that concentration. So some of the other things, just feeling overwhelmed, unable to make those decisions. So becoming overly anxious or jumpy, exhibiting repetitive behaviors. You could be calling lenders all the time because you're worried, or checking the weather all the time. So when farm families are stressed out for long periods and have chronic prolonged stress, they may experience several of these signs and symptoms. So it's not an issue, and you have to talk to a professional about this, okay? Because I'm not diagnosing or anything, but it's not having a lot of these that then make you have a chronic stress where you can then have a diagnosable like anxiety or depression. It's the intensity of that. So you may only have a handful of those, but it's the intensity and the duration and how it affects you on a daily basis. So if it's affecting your performance, that's work or family, then we're then sliding into what we talk about chronic stress or possible disorder. So I know you were asking about that, and so that's has to be determined by a professional. So they will ask you about all these signs and symptoms. They'll ask you how long, and so there's the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That's like the Bible of the Psychiatric Association, and so they go in there and they're looking to see how many of those symptoms that you have. And then when it starts to interfere, that's when we get really concerned about that. We're talking about trying to manage those things before, being proactive. We don't want to wait until the stressor gets overwhelmed and it starts to affect your body. So signs and symptoms of chronic prolonged stress, that can be a change in routine. So some of those things that you might notice is that for a farmer, they may stop attending church. They may have been a 4-H leader and then they stop doing that. They're not, in their usual places like the feed mill. You might notice that with the care of the livestock is declined. So that, before you see anything else, you may notice that, they lose condition, they appear gaunt, they are neglected. Then there's increased illnesses, like I talked about, upper respiratory illnesses. And that's with like not just the farmers, but with the family members. Increased farm accidents. The appearance of the farmstead declines. So they're not taking that pride in keeping things up. And then the children showing stress. So that may show up in academic performance. They may be absent from school. So those are some of the things that may be those signs that you notice in yourself and in others. So is there anything else that? And when you get all that, again, like I like to use the bottle, but when you're talking about not being very decisive, that's when things start to, that stress starts to build up. And this is why we talk about how to handle stress. And we'll go into this. And are we doing okay for time, Ginger? And as far as we're doing, I don't know, Christy, if we're doing okay for time.
We probably need to keep.
Yeah, we need to keep
moving along.
Keep moving, yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I will just talk about these things. I really wanted to give you at least one breathing technique that you can practice. But some of these things that you need to do this on a regular basis, it needs to be something that's a routine. So we're talking about deep breathing. You can do any of these, and really it should be a toolbox of things. So having something for each one of these. Self-talk, and that's telling yourself, I've done this before. I've worked through a difficult time. I can do this again. So there's a gentleman that I watched, and he says he just keeps repeating it. Just keeps repeating those positive things. If he had something pop in his head that was negative, he'll just keep repeating those positive things. And he says sometimes it takes him up to like 30 times before then he starts to feel good and reduces that stress. So meditating, which is being just present in the moment. Exercise is so important. Your diet is so important. Your sleep is so important. You can't take those for granted. Connecting with those social networks and speaking with a professional. We need to tag out to others who really know what they're doing. So I want to do one quick activity that you can do. And I learned this from someone. And one thing that you can do is when you're feeling stressed, and you may do it actually automatically, is that you want to take 2 really quick breaths and then exhale. So try that with me. You want to do 2 and then exhale. It's kind of a sigh, and then relax. And you do that about 3 times, and you'll notice that you'll start having this calming effect immediately. So try it. Try it right now. Do that 3 times, and we'll move on. I think Christy is going to be moving on from here.
I'm up here. So we need to identify your social support system. And thanks, Jackie, for sharing those things. I know, many of us are going through through stressors all of the time, and breathing and working with apps, and the important part is having time for yourself is where we all need to, put ourselves in that mind frame and encourage, the farmers and the people that are around us to go into this mind frame as well. So with that, identify your social support system. You're not alone in this. Farmers are not alone in this. We need to encourage our farmers and families to communicate and share their feelings. And I know that's so much more easier said than done, especially because we're the type of people, farmers are the type of people that like to hold everything in. We in this sample here, it talks about, effective communication with others, having events and things like that. And the biggest part here is breaking down the stigma related to mental health treatment. Oftentimes, we just like to tough it out. Farmers like to tough it out. And, we need to be reminding everyone that it's okay to reach out and share feelings and ask for help. So I'm just wondering here if anyone has any examples of ideas to get farmers talking, throughout whatever you may have going on with your organizations, or, just ideas in general to get them talking. What do you think? Any ideas?
I'm always amazed I shouldn't be amazed, but farmers want to go to other farms. If you have an on-farm farm tour or field day, they'll get there much before you try to invite them to a dinner or another thing. So I think now more than ever, just those kinds of, without really a program, just get them to a farm tour or just an on-farm field day kind of thing, and let, maybe a program or a speaker, but then the rest really to be just more social and networking. You can learn a lot from those side conversations.
Yeah, the side conversations, between the events conversations, those are oftentimes very much key. Any other examples? All right, I think we can move on here. But yeah, just getting farmers out, and whether it's through a formal activity or not, it's just getting them talking and seeing. My guys do better visiting with non-farm people. I watch them from a distance and enjoy them. Yeah. So working with farmers who may be struggling with a high level of stress, here we're getting into, the real meat and potatoes of things. Next slide. So approaching a person who is under chronic stress, and Jackie did a talk about those chronic and acute stresses earlier. So by show of hands, how many, are using the reactions or whatever, how many of you will feel comfortable and confident if you needed to intervene with a farmer who you sense was severely stressed right now? Anybody? Okay. So it's, in the next few minutes here, we're going to talk about how to prepare to approach someone who seems to be under great stress, and just beginning the dialogue to find out the problem, and, providing solutions for that. We're going to focus on active listening, having a true lending ear for these folks, and also the do's and don'ts and tight situations and action plans that you can do for that. Next slide. So thinking and planning ahead, once you've made the decision that you think you're going to approach someone who's been severely stressed or who is under chronic stress, you need to ask yourself some of these questions ahead of time, and come up with some mental answers of, what might be, the answers to these questions and how you think you can approach it. Your game plan could be, you know, why are you going to meet with someone? You know, it could be you're looking at corn, you're going to meet with them to talk about expanding or selling out. Each of these could have very different responses from the family, and answering these questions in your head prior to the meeting or farm will help you feel prepared. And also, you know, with these questions and when you go and meet with these folks, it may not be just a one-time meeting. It might lead you to getting others involved. And the whole point is your relationship with farmers and that your trust with them, you know, in whatever industry that you're working in, you know, you can really serve as a connector point or someone, you know, that farmers feel comfortable with and working to get them the right resources. Next slide here. Okay, so we're gonna talk about having a proper mindset, and we're gonna show a video. Jackie, if you could show that and then come back to this slide, just getting people into the proper mindset of empathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a really powerful video, and showing, putting yourself into a proper mindset for empathy. So, you know, does anyone care to share, you know, what are the differences between empathy and sympathy that we've seen from the video?
You can put them in the chat or you can say them out loud.
Right.
The one I really liked was at least, because I always think in my head, I'm a really empathetic person, but when I heard that, I was like, I do that. I'll say, well, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting that the point that they made about how often empathy is recognizing and sharing when you have been in a similar, space or challenge and sharing that out. So, but I'm also then concerned, does that then make it about you? I'm not, but I like that it's not a judgment. It's like, yeah, I've been there. I've been in this hole too.
Right. Empathy is feeling with people. It's a choice, and it's pretty much, what it comes down to is, are you open to sharing experiences with people and getting onto their level and, helping them with, possible decisions and outcomes and things that need to be made. It's can you help them think, discover, and live with possible outcomes and decisions to be made? Just getting onto their level and just getting yourself into this right mindset can be really helpful in communicating with farmers and people under stress. Next slide. Okay, so the goal here is to have open and honest dialogue. It takes a lot of listening and practice to get to this point, and being empathetic to their situation. So it's the first thing that you want to do when we're talking about the situation and seeing if we can say, let's talk about this situation and see if we can come up with some solutions to work with everyone. Ask for their view and ask, how do you see that situation? So first, in preserving the relationship, you want to open it up for conversation. Tell the facts and impacts on yourself and others, and without judgment or blame. Preserve that relationship. Keep it intact. The second is to create a safety net for listening, and that's pretty much repeating what they're saying to confirm that you're listening. And then the third is to develop a shared purpose of resolving, and that's just working to help them to figure out, are you willing to do this? Do you want to do that? How can we satisfy both your needs and mine, and brainstorm some solutions for that? And don't forget that when you are working through this dialogue with people who may be stressed, don't forget to apologize when you've made a mistake, and using contrast when needed. When you've been misunderstood, use the don't and the do language with that. So an example of this is, I don't want you to think that I don't value our team or what you're saying. I do want us to talk more openly about these problems. And it's good to practice all these skills and get better at communicating through conflict. Next slide. Okay, so this is a really helpful graph to put active listening into perspective when it comes to working with these folks. How often do we go into a meeting or into some sort of setting and then, we think of our own thoughts in mind, like when you're going around in a circle and everyone has to say who they are and where they're coming from, what they're doing. And then when you go to someone else, you totally are not even thinking about what they're saying, right? Who's guilty of doing that, right? A lot of us are guilty doing that. So you want to come into this mind frame of actively listening, truly setting aside your own thoughts and putting your full focus and attention on the people who you are communicating with. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply, and we need to reverse that. So when you look at this continuum, asking is when someone is invited to say something. And the next is going on to probing. It's a way to gently gather some more information from these folks. Attending, paying attention, noticing the conventional or unconventional signs and signals, expressions that may be spoken or communicated in other ways. So paying attention to body language and tone of how you, the person is that you look to be listening to. Restating. So when you hear them talking, with the restating is simply repeating what you think that they said. Paraphrasing is using your own words to restate what the speaker said, just showing that you're paying attention to what they're saying. And then summarizing is paraphrasing and adding emotion into what seemed to be expressed by the speaker. So getting onto their level, with that empathy and with the true notion that you have been listening to them. And then reframing is, in neutral and unbiased terms of, what the speaker really wants, how to come towards positive solutions. Jackie, we're going to need the next slide on this one. So here are some phrases you might use in active listening. So the examples that we have here on the screen, I can see that the current situation is hard for you. What changes would you like to see? I'm eager to help you. I know that you're going through some tough challenges. Tell me what I can do to help. I hear you saying this. It sounds like you're saying this. Does anyone have any examples of other things, of phrases that you can say while you are trying to actively listen to someone? Any ideas? How about, can you tell me more? Are you willing to, just pretty much repeating what they're saying into a question is what you can use to work towards actively listening with someone. Next slide. So here are some statements and questions to help with some stressful situations, and comments that you can make while listening and supporting to the person that you're hearing. So, you could say something like, I know of several farms that are in similar situations. Just letting people know, these farmers know that, they're not the only ones that are dealing with these things. Every situation is a little different. Help me to understand better your situation. Have you thought about this? I could maybe help you with this. I think that if we do this, this new idea might blank. What do you think about that? And let's write down some pros and cons. Oftentimes, this is really true with your work, and it all depends on what the person has to share, and what professional solutions pertaining to the ag industry you might have to offer. The comments you make might be simple and they might be common sense, but remember that stressed people do not think completely clearly. Think about what Jackie was showing us with the cortisol levels and whatnot. Sometimes people just need coaching through some of these really stressful situations and what they can do, and solutions to do better with that. Next slide. So people under stress typically don't process things as well as expected. They're easily overloaded and overwhelmed. You have to be sensitive and help people organize this information in a way that's going to help them remember what was discussed, and the consensus, the solutions that were reached with that. It's just writing it down, helping people write it down, just kind of putting things into a way, whatever people prefer, to have things drawn out for them to help them come up with some solutions is, what you kind of have to gauge from talking with the people and how you can help them. Maybe they want you to text something to them or send it to them in an email, just kind of when you're talking with them, just gauge of how they're feeling and how you think you can help them with these solutions like I said, whether they're common sense or not, just to work towards helping them. And then also with that, timely follow-up and written communication, reviewing this discussion is critical. Have patience as you walk through these options. Thinking about someone that's really stressed, again, these solutions can be really much, very much so common sense, but people aren't thinking clearly when they're under chronic and severe stress. You have to listen to what these people are saying. Active listening is extremely key in these situations. You may have a grasp of reality of a situation, but because of real and measurable impacts of stress, your clients and customers may not see that situation as clearly. Next slide. So when you're talking with these folks and you're actively listening and really truly, caring about what they say and how you can potentially help them, you want to follow up. It's critical to follow up if you said that you would, and it's just as critical to be following up even if you didn't say that you would. When people are in chronic stress, they need to know that someone cares about them. Just making a phone call, stopping by to say hi goes a long, long way. Texting, just checking in, and that can be from more than one person too. Kind of like whoever you're talking with, if they're confiding in, and you kind of encourage them to be working with some other folks too. Please just follow up with them. It really goes a long, long way in working towards getting that person or people on the right road to recovery with stress. Next slide. It's critical that you answer for yourself, what in your role exactly can you do? You don't want to promise on things that you cannot deliver on. So your main role is to help people identify and tap into the resources that they need to get through a crisis. So I mentioned here about the simple follow-ups and just kind of seeing and checking in, hey, how you are and what you might have to offer. But, you have to realize that in your role, you might not be the total solution to what these people need for help. And so your main role is to, again, identify and tap into the resources that they need to get through a crisis. Dealing with stress requires a holistic or team approach. You have to make sure you involve all of the right people with expertise, considering issues of finance, production, other technical specialties that some farmers might be dealing with. Do not overlook the roles of health professionals, including mental health professionals in this realm. I know a lot of times these farmers might think, just talking with their peers or talking with, ag professionals or talking with their family and friends is going to be enough to get them by and help them tough it out and get through it. But you know what, sometimes you really have to talk with a mental health professional to get you where you need to be. It is okay to ask for help and break down that stigma of, not of thinking that, you don't have to reach out to someone or that nothing's available to you. There are resources available. We're going to be showing kind of later on here with some of the resources, like the Agri-Stress helpline in Pennsylvania. There are resources in our communities that can help, whether you think that you have it right in your backyard or not. But the whole thing is to don't promise what you cannot individually do. You want to be able to help provide resources to folks, that can help from an external part beyond you. Next question. Next slide, relationship between chronic stress and suicide. Jackie, I think this is where this goes on to you. And I don't know if we had any comments here in the chat, into the chat.
Thanks, Christy. Can you repeat that? I've never heard that idea before, so I'm not sure what that was related to.
That was an active listening example.
Oh, active listening. Okay, so and you've probably done active listening before, and that's being attentive. That's rephrasing what people are saying. Keeping the focus on them, not on you.
Right.
Is that what you were thinking, Amy?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so then the relationship between chronic stress and suicide, we talked quite a bit about stress, and then when it does become chronic. So during this section, we're going to discuss, a sensitive topic of suicide. So before we begin this discussion, it's important to remember your self-care at this time. So if this generates uncomfortable or overwhelming feelings, then you're encouraged to take a break or private message someone, Christy or Ginger in the chat. You can ask them questions. And if you need to talk about it afterwards, tell us. We don't want anyone to feel kind of left out here after we're finished. Again, this webinar is not a replacement for professional advice. So we encourage you that if you're feeling, if this has brought up some feelings, we encourage you to seek professional help. You may have an employee assistance program, or you may just need to go to a qualified provider. One thing that I always encourage folks to do is sometimes they're comfortable, sometimes, not all the time, they're comfortable with their family doctor. And that's a good starting point, because I encourage everyone to, when they're not feeling well, there can be a lot of physical issues that may be responsible for that. So you need to get a complete checkup, especially if you're also on medications for things. So chronic stress can be difficult to deal with, and it can build up over time, like we had talked, and have this profound impact. So dealing with the chronic stress, it may become difficult for people to see solutions like Christy had talked about. And then what happens is they start experiencing those significant worsening signs and symptoms, where then you hear about hopelessness and helplessness, and that's when we get concerned about suicide. So we've talked about communication, listening, social support, and coping skills. It's important that you're aware of suicide warning signs and be prepared if you're ever in that situation. So we've discussed some stressors, the economic ones, the communicating with farmers. Now we're going to be talking about this chronic stress and suicide. And it's an awkward conversation, and I completely understand that. I worked in mental health, and I have to say, in all the times that I worked in crisis, that it never really got any easier. It was always a very intense situation, and we took it very seriously. And before we start talking about that, I do want to talk briefly about language. And this is something that we talk about in mental health first aid. And so during the conversation, when we talk about suicide, is that you may hear me say die by suicide or took their own life. And we're moving away from using the words committed or successful, because the word commit, if you think about it, it's associated with things like committing a crime or committing a sin. And so as a negative, it has a negative stigmatizing connotation, and that can present one of the barriers, that can present a barrier. So we want to use that. We don't want to use that. And we want to say, if we're talking about someone, we want to say die by suicide. And also successful. We sometimes say they were successful with suicide, and that gives a connotation that that was something positive that happened. So we don't want to use that language either. So it's either die by suicide or took their own life. So the warning signs. And again, these may, this is all going to vary, and I'm going to put these all up here. So you may have someone who's talking about or writing about suicide. You'll probably pick up on those things like feeling hopeless, trapped, feeling like a burden, giving away possessions, possibly making a plan. Just because someone has suicidal ideations doesn't mean that they're in a complete crisis situation. But when they start making a plan, inquiring means, that's when we absolutely need to tag out and get additional help. So saying goodbyes, isolation from others, loss of interest in doing those like things that they usually do. So if they, enjoyed golfing, or if they enjoyed hunting or fishing, and then they just are not interested in anymore, that's a change. And mood changes. So, and it doesn't always have to be like that anxiety. It can be angry. So like I always say for like even older adults, when you might have that grumpy old man or that grumpy old woman, and that can be because of the mood. They can have that increase in anger instead of sadness. So that, you know, some of the other things are like acting recklessly, increased, you know, misuse of drugs and alcohol. And alcohol is, you know, something that a lot of folks engage in. That's a cultural thing. But then it becomes, you know, they misuse it to help them with sleeping or to help them with their mood. So that there might have some sleep changes, and then that anxiety and agitation is part of it too. So these are just some of the warning signs of suicide. Some of the things that these are statements that people make. And I think the ones that were the most difficult for me is those that were kind of coded. When people would say things that were coded to me, and that's always kind of scary. So you might have things that are very clear, like I'm going to kill myself, but then you also have statements like, don't be surprised if I die in a tractor rollover. You know, it very clear is if you proclose, you'll see my obit next week. And coded things like, if you pass away, I want you to have one of my possessions. And then what happens if to my debt if I die? So these are statements that, examples of things that you may hear. You know, saying to the doctor, is that enough medicine to kill someone? When I can't sleep like this, I don't give a whatever about my life anymore. I'm going to be leaving you with nothing, I'm afraid, just my burdens. You need to look after your mother when I'm gone. I don't think I can keep going. Why don't I just shoot myself and let the bank have this place? So those are a lot of direct and indirect things. And then when you do hear those, you know, it's important that if it's, you know, it's vague, then you need to ask. You need to ask a question. And this is the difficult one. And so I'll ask you if you can repeat after me, and you can do it, you know, in the privacy of your own home there. But I want you to practice saying this, and it's not comfortable saying it, but after you say it a couple times, then, you know, hopefully you'll feel a little bit more comfortable. So if you repeat after me, are you having thoughts of suicide? Again, say that again to yourself. Are you having thoughts of suicide? So in the future, again, when you need to ask someone about their thoughts of suicide, this is okay. And like when I was treating, you know, my patients, they wanted someone. They wanted to be able to talk about it. They wanted someone to know. They felt this sort of relief when they were able to tell me. So it does not increase the risk of suicide. And like I said, it can be a relief for someone to feel like they got that off their chest and they want to talk about it. So I'm just, you know, and I realize we have limited time here. So we don't want to use a term like, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Or are you thinking about harming yourself? It's too vague. It can be misinterpreted. And especially when they're, you know, they may be misusing something. So if they could harm themselves by misusing drugs or alcohol. So we really do want to ask the direct question. So again, if some people feel concerned about asking this question, you know, what if someone says yes? What do? You can put that in the chat. You know, what do you do if someone says yes? What is your next step? That's difficult. I think that's sometimes why people don't ask that, because that's the scary part. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, what if someone says, yeah, I've been thinking about it. But don't leave that person alone. That's the thing that you have to remember. Don't leave them alone. Don't say, oh, that's too bad. And then kind of end that conversation. Don't leave that person alone. call for help if you need to. And Christy and I will put the suicide line up. You can call that yourself. You don't have to be suicidal to call the suicide hotline, and they're available. They're there to help you. So if you feel like overwhelmed when someone says this, just tell the person, say, I really think I need some help with this situation. Is it okay if I call? Because I would like to talk to someone. I'm not sure what I should be doing right now. Another thing you can do is, call for help from their family. Ask their family if it's appropriate and a family is supportive, then ask them for help. Or if you need to, then take them to the hospital. Take them to a healthcare provider. Make sure that someone listens. That's really important. So the suicide, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that's always available. That actually, as of July 1st, that's going to be changing to 988. That will be universal across the United States. And so you can use that 988 to call. But again, put that in your phone right now. If you have an opportunity to do that, put 988 in there so you remember, or you can put the 800 number right now, since the 988 is not effective until July 1st. Okay, someone says, if you don't live close to them, call the local police department and ask for a wellness check. Yes, thank you, Kathy. And you can also, you can also tell the police department when you call and just say, that this is a mental health crisis. And some counties, not every county, has a mental health unit often, and they dispatch that. If not, then quite a few law enforcement and state police actually are trained in a mental health crisis. So they can come. Go ahead.
Kelly actually shared another thing. She actually must have experienced herself.
And where was this in the chat?
Right above.
Okay.
I recognize your stress, and that's why I asked. I have the rest of the day, so I'm happy to listen if you want to talk about it. Yeah, I think that's great.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely. Realize that a lot of folks feel like, well, maybe, I'm not the person to be doing this, but we all need to play a part in this. We need to, there aren't enough people to help with the mental health system right now. We all need to help with this. And so if we can just even connect them, if you feel overwhelmed by this, at least connect them to something, give them a phone number, tell the family, tell them to, and I'll advance to the next slide. So you'll receive this. We'll get you a copy of the PowerPoint. You can you'll receive these contacts. If there's something local, like I said, if you're playing a part or a role in this, find out what resources available in your area. Some of you are very rural and you don't have anything really close by, but find out what is in the next town. Sometimes in my area, I live in Clearfield County, it's not uncommon for us to have to travel an hour in order to get to a resource that we feel would be very helpful. What other resources do you have in your community that you would like to share with us on this webinar right now?
It's easier for me to talk than it is to text.
Go ahead.
Type.
Go ahead.
I found that a small group at my daughter's church was very helpful. And it proved to me that you can find small groups of people that it's a safe group, not one that's going to go out the door and spread your business.
Mm-hmm.
And, and what I learned in this small group was I was not the only person going through something terrible.
No. Mm-hmm.
Which kind of gives you a little solace, which it shouldn't, because everybody there had really big problems, but it does make you feel that you are not alone. Life dishes out stuff all the time and you have to work through it, but you can find safe groups. And I don't mean physical safe. I mean, like,
confidentiality.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they're out there, and it doesn't have to be a religious group. I do attend their church on occasion. It's just not close enough to our farm. but happened to be a small group going on right at the same time, and it was perfect timing for me. So that's when I've one big help in our situation.
And Amy, how did you find out about that?
The author was Lisa Turkhurst. That the group was based around, and my daughter had invited me. She was going through this situation with us. And in that author's
So word of
situation
mouth.
was, yeah, and the author, her last kid went to college, and then her husband said goodbye. And it was like totally blindsided, like so many things in life blindside us. And, mine started with an email at 9:00 at night. So, you just never know what.
And would you suggest this to other people?
I would suggest her as an author, yes, and small groups, definitely safe small groups, because even though I really have come a long way, I still find myself isolating sometimes, where I just want to like grab a blanket and couch potato, but I can't. There's too much to do. But it's very easy to go that way.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you,
easy.
Amy, for sharing. So in review, then you can see here farmers can have stress due to experiencing extreme economic conditions. And so I know that all of you are keenly aware of that. Chronic stress is a common response. But again, that chronic stress, I think you understand that when it starts to interfere with your daily living, that's when you need to be, you need to do something about it. Listening empathetically, like Christy had talked about, that positive self-talk and that mindful breathing and acceptance. Those are coping skills. Those are 3 really basic, but really effective coping skills. That self-talk, you can come up with phrases yourself that you feel that resonate with you, and you can repeat those. Again, if you feel like you're in a funk, start repeating those positive things over and over. You have accomplished so much. It's really impressive. I don't think farmers realize how impressive they are, and they don't give themselves credit for that. That's pretty amazing what they do.
Sharing gratitude, what you're grateful for every day. These are all things that can certainly help you out and help these farmers out.
Absolutely. Acknowledge yourself. Do that breathing. I know it seems kind of silly, but that mindful breathing, we don't breathe. Most of us don't breathe well throughout the day. And that can bring along immediate relaxation and that acceptance that, yes, there are things that are out of our control, but there are things that we can do. And that's when we have to figure out, we have to use our problem solving skills and never leave that distressed person alone. Call a friend, family, or the 911 or crisis team if necessary. So would you be able to deal with someone now? Well, that's a good question. If you feel that you still need some additional help, please don't hesitate to join us for our mental health first aid. We go over all of this in so much more detail. And we would also like to ask you if you would complete our survey before you end today. So are there any additional comments in the chat?
Jackie.
Yes, okay. Go ahead.
Does someone have a question?
I was just going to say, I pasted the evaluation link into chat, so you can just click on it before you leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger.
Jackie, somebody had a good suggestion.
Yeah.
They attended one of these sessions and they said that presenter had encouraged, so if you go back to the phone numbers, had encouraged the people attending that session to actually try calling those numbers just to see what it's like, so that if you're in a urgent situation, like you at least know what to expect, like actually call.
Take a picture with your phone. Take a picture of your phone with your phone right now of these numbers.
Yeah, take it. And then you could actually try calling them, even if it's not an emergency, to just see what it's like, to make sure that you know. So if you're out on a farm and you need help. The other one that I thought was a really good suggestion was putting one or more of these numbers in your phone, like actually saving it as a contact in your phone. The Agri Stress helpline is new. And the person who introduced that at one of the meetings, had said adding it into his phone, and I did that, so it's there. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is also another good number. You may never need it, but you might run into somebody who does. So I thought both of those suggestions were really good. Does anyone else have any other questions for Jackie and Christy before we close?
I do. How do you assist a family through a family member committing suicide? And I have a personal relationship with a family whose daughter did 3 years ago. And the mom has thrown herself into more work and some activism, but the father is still really struggling.
Yeah, that's a difficult situation. Thank you for sharing, and I'm sorry to hear about what happened there. It's heartbreaking news. And one of the most simple things that you can do is just be available and tell them that you're available, checking in, listening to them, and encouraging them to, because they are going to need that social support, and they are going to need those resources, those maybe professional, maybe self-help, but they need to know that people are out there that are supporting them. And not just once, going back again and saying, that you're available, that you're willing to listen.
That's where that active listening comes into play here. You might not always have the answers that these folks might be looking for, but you're willing to take the time to sit there and just to listen to what they say, to probe them, be attentive to their conversations, restate what you hear them saying, paraphrase it, summarize it, and then help them reframe it into a way and, offer solutions that can, help to bring up those, bring up the resources that are here on this slide, and people that might be in the community that, like Amy had mentioned, just taking the time to really listen to these people is what we can recommend from here. Jackie, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
And just also too, it's everyone copes with it differently, and it's a devastating thing to go through, and they're going through a lot of grief right now, and they're going through that grief process, and sometimes folks are just not ready. They're just not ready to talk to other people, and that's okay. But when you go to talk to them, that's why you need to go back and say, I'm concerned about you. I've noticed this, I'd like you to talk to me. I am available whenever you're ready. And so not everyone is ready, but they need to know that you are available and that you're willing to listen.
Yeah, I've done a lot of that, but thank you.
Yeah, they need to connect with resources, and as a friend, you can make suggestions for resources. You can make suggestions for professional help, but until they're ready, they need to make that decision. But giving them those that information is empowering, and that's really important when they're going through that really incredible time in their life, that grief. But offering that to them is what a friend can do.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Any other questions for Jackie or Christy before we end? And I think the one thing, Kathy, I heard recently is, I think just letting that person know that other people care, I think is a big thing. Is sometimes just reaching out, and you might think it might be awkward, or you're the only, it's not, they won't want to hear from you. But I think just knowing that you're there and you care and you're willing to listen goes a long way. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the webinar and thank our presenters, Christy and Jackie. I think you guys did a great job. This was really valuable information. We hope you all feel a little bit more confident in having those difficult conversations about mental health in the farm community. We'll be sending out the follow-up evaluation asking for your feedback. So if you didn't get the link, it will get it via email. Also get a recording of this webinar and links to additional resources. So please check them out. And like Jackie and Christy said, their Penn State Farm Stress team is here to help, and they have lots of great resources available. A couple other things I did want to mention to those ag professionals. On the call, we are hosting an industry breakfast at Ag Progress Days on August 10th to summarize the results of a mental health survey we did in February. We concluded in February. We actually surveyed both livestock producers and ag professionals on some really good questions related to mental health in the ag community, and we'll be sharing those results at that breakfast. So stay tuned to learn more. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and thank the USDA Farm Ranch Stress Assistance Network program for making this possible.
And Jane, and remember, and I wanted to remind the participants that the handouts that were sent to them are, that's good information. So take some time to look at those and share those. That would be something that you could share with families that you're concerned about. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
We can stick on.